Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I've got a honeysuckle here in the cottage garden that has done nothing in the 3 years we've been here at Berryfield. I've never seen a single flower on it. I don't even know what the flower's like, so I can't identify it exactly, but it's semi-evergreen and probably from the Japonica group. However, I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm going to cut it back hard, dig it up and move it, because I've got a new home for it where I think it may well do better. Part of the problem seems to me that it's very dry under the shadow of this hedge, and there's an old tree stump, which I presume it was planted to clamber over. Now, tonight's 1 hour programme does have a kind of theme over and above our normal seasonal jobs, and that is gardening in extreme conditions. I shall be making a start on my shade garden. Carol will be working in the alpine garden. Joe will be doing some spring maintenance around the pond and getting to grips with the bog garden. And Sarah will be sowing tender vegetables. At the end of last week's programme, we showed you these 3 brand new plots that myself, Carol and Joe will be making this series. They're completely empty, they're in a row, and we can do whatever we like in them. Now, I've started to dig out a curving path that I want to arrive at the tree, but the one dominant factor about this space is shade. Now, I get loads of letters with people saying, how do I deal with the problem of shade? And I always say the same thing, it's not a problem, it's an opportunity. There's lots that you can do with it. Loads of plants that actually relish it and like the shelter. But before you begin thinking about planting, you need to work out a kind of horticultural clock of where the sun operates throughout the day in your garden. And on this spot, if I stand here, I'm looking up to the sun, which is shining weakly through the cloud and coming through a whole tangle of branches. Now, there are no leaves yet, but it won't be long before that is just a solid wall of foliage, and I'll get no sun here at all in the morning. And this tree, this beautiful pear tree, which is the centre of the garden and where the path is leading round to, is lovely. But it does have a canopy. And again, no sun will get through that. So I do need to bear that in mind. However, here at Berryfields, the sun rises in the east, which is over there, comes up, and you can see the sun shining on me now, and will clear those leaves and foliage by the middle of the day. And round about midday, it'll shine through into this corner. So I have a really bright, sunny corner round about midday, and that same sun, as it moves across the sky, will come underneath the canopy of the pear tree, which is why I'm bringing the path round to here, because I have a seat to get the evening sun. And right about tea time, I think, that sun will barrel down this fence and light up this corner, so I can think of my planting, what looks good in early evening sunshine. And already I'm getting a map of different times of day, darkness in the morning, light in the evening, a little bit of light there. Unfortunately, there's no doubt about it, that this far corner, which faces north and is shaded as well, is going to get no light at all. In fact, right the way down this fence, it's going to be dark all day long. However, there are still plants that I can use and choose to make that work. But before I think about putting plants in the ground, I need to get the hard landscaping done, make the mess, sort it out, and then I can work on the soil. Now, when you dig out a path, it is an opportunity to see what the soil is like. It's not as though there are 2 distinct types of gardening, hard landscaping and planting. It's all part of the same thing. And the idea is that I dig out the space I want the path to go in. I've used the rope, which I borrowed from Carol's garden, to get the curve. Just used a couple of bits of bamboo to hold it in place. Get a feel for the soil, and then I'll put hardcore in here and I can start making it. Now, if you can't imagine how a shade garden could ever look really good with lots of colour, because I'm certain it will, we thought we would show you. So we paid a visit to Gay Wilson's garden, where she has been gardening in the gloom for the last 30 years, and it's beautiful.
Everyone has shade in their garden somewhere, and I think the thing is, you have to live with it, you have to go with it, there's nothing you can do about it. The house itself, being a corner house, faces south, But everything that we look at, of course, is north facing. So that's what sort of interested me, really, because everything I look at is shade. The garden, when we first arrived, was grass from end to end. But of course the trees were nothing like as big then. But slowly, over 35 years, it's become denser and denser. The main thing of shade, if you're looking at it, which we do from the house, is that one's got to bring light in plants. So sometimes it's quite a good idea to plant a dark background and have light sort of not variegated, because that's not so good, I think, but sort of lime green or sharp acid greens in front of it. Because it's a small London garden, the best thing, I think, is to put things in the way in each place. So you have an area and it's defined, but a lot of people thinking, I need the space, won't put a tree or an upright of some kind. But those uprights make it look much bigger because it puts something in the way and you can sort of see through, and it also leads you through. The eye wants to say what's behind there. Well, there's two different kinds of shade here. We've got dry shade and damp shade. The Sweet Cicely looks terrific in the dry shade, and also Ajuga seems to work just about. The Crocosmia works in the dry shade, and geraniums. Oh, and I have one thing I love, which is usually a weed, which is Corydalis ocroleuca. It's beautiful. And you just pull it up where you don't want it, but it does in all sorts of places, certainly in the shade. A really good thing, I think, for late summer is Carangoshoma, which flowers regularly in the shade. They show up against the dark, the yellow sort of pod-like flowers. One fiend is Mind Your Own Business, which we thought we'd buried. It was at the bottom of some steps and we had put a whole lot of soil over it. And it suddenly emerged, but to great effect, because it covers all my watering system pipes. So it turned out to be very useful. It softens all the hard edges, and it grows around the pots, and they look as if they've been there for years and years and years, which they have. It just gives me joy all the time, because spring is terrific, because it's light. Shapes look good in winter, and in the summer, I hope to do not very much in it, to just sit in it and enjoy it, because by that time there's not much you can do. You know, you've done it all. So I leave it for the rest of the year.
Well, our shady spring garden is looking absolutely fantastic at the moment, but so too is our alpine garden. Things are really beginning to start to happen. Look at this Iris reticulata. We planted this in the autumn, and it's come through, and we've got, oh, I don't know, a score of flowers here, really rich, beautiful blue. These little auriculas, though, are still folded against the worst that the weather could throw at them during the winter. Our little alpine greenhouse that Monty converted from a propagation house last year feels completely at home, but there's room for us to add plenty of new and really choice alpine specialities to our expanding collection. Alpines have to endure extreme conditions where they come from, and sometimes it's difficult to grow some of them here, because the conditions in a British winter are quite different from conditions on the top of some alpine peak. Sometimes they're under the snow from September right through to the late spring or even early summer, but in here we can give them the conditions that they want. What they really can't stand is sitting around in damp conditions. We built this sandbed because this is the very best way of growing alpines. Once they're in terracotta pots and sunk right down into the sand, they can absorb moisture through the walls of the pots, and you never have to water them from above, so there's no risk of them rotting. And in deference to these beautiful alpines that are at their peak right now, I feel we ought to turn this sandbed into a real altar. So I'm going to repot some of these, and we don't need very much mixture because they're not very big plants. I'm going to start off with some sterilised loam and just take a couple of trowels full of that. And you've got to remember is that they need a compost which will retain moisture on the one hand, but which is really well drained. This is leaf mould, sieved leaf mould, and then grit, which is possibly the most important ingredient of the lot. Almost as much grit as the other two ingredients combined. Mix it thoroughly. Just pretend you're making pastry. Lovely. Because they're going to live in this for quite a long time. Most alpines will actually reach 7 years old under normal conditions. And that's not bad, is it, for a plant that only costs you a couple of pounds? Right, and very, very important to use clay pots. And I'm going to crop these. Drainage is essential for these plants. That's a major requirement. So plenty of crops in the bottom. Little bit of compost, first of all. This is one that's impossible to say. Saxifraga Federico Augustii, subspecies Grisbachii. There you go. And I haven't even got my glasses on. And try and lower it down so it's absolutely flush with the top of the pot. And then you know there's no chance of it getting really wet. And gently put in the compost, firming it down all the time as you do it. And then the most important thing of the lot is this grit on the top, and that will keep that rosette perfectly dry. Now, this is a lovely thing. Not all alpines are actually perennial plants. Some of them are shrubs, and this is, I suppose, a shrublet. It's a polygala. It's milkwort, but a very unusual one. It's got these kind of butterfly flowers. But one of the things it does is to make little tiny running roots, and you can actually propagate it from those later. And this one's bumping into the side of this plastic pot, so I'm going to repot it into a big clay pan, and I think it ought to have pride of place in here. After repotting, always give the plants a good drink. The best way to do this is to place your alpine in a tray of water. The plant will then draw the water up by capillary action. But now that it's all in place and our altar's complete, I want to water the sand itself. This will ensure that they'll all get just the right amount of moisture. A few weeks ago at Kew Gardens, they opened their brand new state-of-the-art alpine house. It's a fantastic construction, and if you want real inspiration and to see alpines from all over the world, why not get along there and have a look?
There's nothing else quite like it in the world. It was designed by Wilkinson Eyre architects, who are probably most famous for the Winking Bridge at Gateshead. But the reason we had the height in this house is to create what they call a stack effect, like a chimney, so the warm air inside the house leaves through the vents in the top, and it draws a cooler air through the gaps at the side, and that keeps the air moving so it never actually warms up too much, so it's a way of keeping the temperature down. The environmental controls for this house is all governed by computer, so they open and close the vents according to the temperature. If it rains, it closes the vents to keep the rain off the plants, and if it gets too hot, then it puts up the shading in the summer to keep the plants cool.
We've got the most beautiful shading system, actually. It makes the house look a bit like a Chinese junk or something sailing into the rock garden. It's yachting technology, sails on great spokes which arch up into the top of the roof. We need it not to give the plants shade, but to keep them cool. They've come up with a really elegant solution to it. It's absolutely beautiful. When we were building the landscape, we knew that we needed certain types of little microclimates for different plants. Where I'm working at the moment is a gully in which we put plants which need a lot of moisture for most of the year, although they do need that moisture withheld, which is why they're not outside. So we've got this really extraordinary creepy plant from Japan, Asarum fudsonoe, which has got really curious flowers. And I think the general public, because it's quite sparse, the planting here, actually will be able to zoom in on that plant and see how amazing it is. Here we have a windswept plain. So we've got these funnels pouring out cool air which passes across the plants. What it does is it encourages them to keep really tight, which helps you to avoid rotting. So all the little cushions here will gradually spread out and fill together, so we'll have this lovely hummocky landscape. Here we have the cliff. On the north face we have lots of cushion plants which we've planted into crevices, and excitingly they seem to be thriving. This is a Dionysia. Dionysias come from extraordinary habitats. You can imagine driving up a gorge in Iran and seeing these great dollops of yellow almost dripping off the cliff face. The flowers are quite extraordinary. So you've got the diversity of the plants, the diversity of the flowers. They're astonishing and amazing. So I don't know what it is, but you get hooked. Yeah, watch out.
I'm starting to plant two of the cucurbit family. Both melons and cucumbers are part of that family, and now is a very good time to sow them. So I'm going to use a mix of our peat-free compost and perlite, which just adds good drainage, because both the cucurbits really love a freely drained soil. And I'm going to put them straight, one seed, into a coir pot, because one of the things about them is that they don't like root disturbance. So with those pots, they're biodegradable, and you can just plant them straight into the soil. The other thing is that they have very large, flat seeds, both of them. And with a large, flat seed, you need to sow it vertically straight into the pot, because otherwise the water sits on the surface of the seed and rots it off. So you always want to plant them vertically like that, and then you get a much better germination rate. So the coir pots can just get stacked into a normal seed tray, and then there's no pricking out at all. They can just go straight from here into the garden. And in the case of cucumbers, I am literally going to plant them in the garden, because I've selected two varieties. One's called Burt Plus Tasty Green. It's got quite a good name, which is meant to be more digestible than others. And another's called Xena, which actually my daughter Molly first bought at a plant sale and planted in her veg patch at home. She has a little patch because she loves cucumbers. And one plant that she bought at this sale produced literally about 30 mini cucumbers, about the size of a sort of large cigar or whatever. And she loved them. She'd eat them all in one sitting, so they are really brilliant for kids. And totally happy growing outside in the garden on a little frame. And Burt Plus Tasty Green too, I've had on a teepee, just mixed in with my dahlias for several years now, and it just thrives. The melons, we're growing for a couple of varieties that are really famously sweet. The first one is called Antalya, and another one is called Jenny Lind. Melons do need a bit more heat and humidity. So we're going to plant in the area at the end of the greenhouse, which has got our propagating going on at the moment of our seeds and cuttings. But once they're all out in the garden, we'll turn the heat up, we'll really increase the humidity, and the melons will go in there and they will thrive.
have you got on?
I've done 1 delicious cucumber and 1 delicious melon so far.
I could help with tomatoes or aubergines. What would you like?
You do tomatoes.
Right.
I'm going to pop these in the hot end of the greenhouse.
Okay, fine. Now, I always sow tomatoes in a seed tray and then prick them out, simply because I find it less fiddly than sowing into plugs, but either will do. And when you're growing tomatoes at home, it is worth working out what you want from them, and then that will determine your choice, and also where you're going to grow them, because obviously some will grow outside, some must have a greenhouse, and some do better at different times of year. And the choice we've made for berry fields for this year is Costoluto Fiorentino. It's Italian beefsteak tomato, rather late, rather slow to develop, but really delicious, really good eaten raw or cooked. There's Gardener's Delight, which everybody grows, but it's a wonderful little cherry tomato. You can eat it cooked. It's very, very good roasted, delicious raw, and also you can grow it outside. Tomatoes, by the way, are dead easy to grow. Just scatter the seed, give them water, put them in warmth of about 15 degrees, and they will grow.
Last year, the pond was a great success. It was fantastic. It's been in a few years now, and you do have to be patient with ponds, but we finally got the right balance between aquatics and marginal plants, and it erupted with colour last year. It was absolutely fabulous. And we did put in that island for the ducks, and they seem to be loving it. And as far as the main pond goes, what we need to do is regular maintenance in the autumn, which I did, cutting back the marginal plants, stopping them falling into the water and decaying. But now in the spring, I need to cut them back really hard so that it gives them room to grow and put on a fabulous display again this year. These purple loosestrife and dwarf bulrushes were gorgeous last year and brought loads of butterflies and bees into the garden, and they're still looking pretty nice now. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut them back, just like a perennial plant you would in the garden, right down to the ground, and these shears are the perfect tool for the job. There, well, that's done, and that can all go on the compost heap. With evergreen marginals like this Junker, simply pull out the dead growth. This improves the plant's appearance and also helps to promote strong new growth. Well, that's the maintenance done on the main pond, but this bog garden needs a lot of serious attention. The problem being, it's not a bog. The soil is far too dry, and we've had some problems with it because the idea initially was that the overflow from the pond would flow into this boggy area, but it just wasn't retaining the moisture at all. So what we've had to do is dig the whole lot up down to about 2 feet, put a plastic liner underneath it, puncture the liner so it doesn't just become a stagnant pond, and then backfill it with the soil and incorporate loads of organic matter at the same time. And what we've also done is put some pipes in here, as you can see, so when the pond does overflow, the water actually goes into the bog garden here, because this has to be sustainable. So the next thing to do is replant it. We dug up all the plants before from the old bog garden, and now it's time to put them back in. I'm going to divide some of these Iris pseudoacorus or yellow flag plants so that I can plant a drift of them through the bog garden. This vigorous water iris is ideal for wildlife and will produce elegant yellow flowers. Caltha palustris, or marsh marigold as it's commonly known, has amazing yellow flowers in the spring. It grows well in a bog garden or in shallow water and is very easy to get established.
You're scrabbling in the mud again, Joe.
In the bog, Monty.
You're in a bog.
What you got there then?
Well, I've got a real goodie here, actually, because given our pathetic failure with our last gunnerer,
oh yeah,
I've got a replacement.
Oh, that's a beauty, isn't it?
Yeah, beautiful, really nice big gunnerer, and you can see it's got all these buds waiting to burst into foliage.
It got seriously knocked back in the spring, didn't it? It got frosted.
Somebody took the fleece off.
Yeah, somebody, no names mentioned.
No.
It wasn't me, though. Don't look at me like that.
No, I mean, we've all done it. You get a warm spell, lovely sunny day, sort of end of April, early May.
Yeah.
you release out of captivity. Things like the gunnerer, which are tender, and then bang, they get hit again. But we'll watch this like a hawk.
And it was too dry. So hopefully this time...
Now you've fixed it, it should be okay. I mean, the thing about gunnerer is, although obviously it's got to have water, it likes boggy conditions, it doesn't like sitting in the wet. The technique is, think of it like a dustbin. Dig a hole the size of a dustbin, and then fill it with straw, compost, whatever you've got that will act like a wick and soak up the water.
Right.
Okay.
It's pretty wet down
Yeah,
there.
that is wet. What we'll do is put some straw in there, in the bottom, like that.
Yep.
And that will rot down fairly quickly.
Yep.
There's some compost on top of that. A combination of the straw and the compost. As well as feed it, because they're greedy plants. You think of those great big roots. Crucially, it'll be sodden with water. And the roots will have water and it can easily grow down through them, so you get this real column of root. Once you've finished planting, water it thoroughly. And finally, protect the plant from frost with straw or fleece. All right.
OK, I'll just keep pegging it down a bit.
Fine. Now, having dug out the line of where I want the path to go, I'm putting in some hardcore. I'll spread a few inches of that along the bottom and firm it down, and that will give a nice firm foundation and good drainage for the surface of the path, which I'll lay over the top of that. I've compacted the surface of the hardcore just with a piece of board and a sledgehammer. You can hire whacker plates, but if you're prepared to do the work, the board works perfectly well. And the idea is to get rid of any loose bits that will cause the path to settle down and form dips and hollows if it rains a lot, or simply you walk along it a lot. Having established a base for the path, I can now plan the surface. Now, I've decided to use reclaimed bricks. They're a lovely colour. I like brick anyway, in all its forms. But I'm going to mix and match them with some cobbles. I don't want this to cost a lot of money. I want to recycle materials and also keep it soft. I'm basing the path on a regular series of 8 bricks, placed in alternating patterns, and the spaces in between them infilled with cobbles. And I've also used bricks to create the path edge. I'm using cement to bind them together and fix them to the foundations. Well, that's the brick more or less in position. It's fairly rough, but it's nice and steady, and I find this stage really exciting. We've got this great big bed swirling round and then a strip of real dark there. And I'm starting to draw up lists of plants in my mind. And I will have to use ground cover. And the one word of warning I would say about ground cover is be careful what you wish for, because if ground cover works at all, it is by definition invasive. However, having said that, I'll be planting vinca, major and minor, and the white form, which will get that white colour coming through. And growing up through them, white foxgloves, which will take quite a lot of shade. Also, we can have Alchemilla mollis growing nearer the path with its yellow flowers. Acanthus mollis with great spires of flower, and those wonderful seed pods and really lustrous green leaves. Now, all these are essentially woodland plants, but you don't need a wood to grow woodland plants. Any shade, particularly dapple shade, will make the perfect home for that kind of planting. And last spring, Carol went down to the garden house in Devon to see woodland planting at its very best.
These gardens are one of the best examples in the country of naturalistic planting, designed to meld with the landscape, creating an ethereal beauty. The ground is bursting with eye-catching gems and luxuriant colours.
I think the wonderful thing is that not only does the garden fit into the landscape, but you feel part of the whole landscape too, don't you?
Much of the work here can be attributed to the former head gardener, Keith Wiley, who, over the last 25 years, moulded the gardens to their present shape. But now, the new head gardener, Matt Bishop, has taken on the responsibility of caring for this truly magical place. Just look at those erythroniums in that dapple light underneath the magnolia.
They're fantastic.
They are beautiful. Does it just seed itself?
Well, I think what happened is Keith, who created this bit of the garden, actually would get the seed of Revolut and collect it up and just chuck it underneath. Just like
throw it
grass.
about on a windy day.
Yeah, that's right. And they take about 4 years to flower.
The Revolutums are species, but you've also got clumps of these wonderful hybrids. I love that Joanna, that very apricotty one. And I adore that white beauty, Revolutum white beauty.
Yes.
That's one that everybody could get hold of.
Yes, quite easily.
By summertime, those will completely have faded away.
Yes.
I mean, that's the thing about so many woodland plants, isn't it? They're those sort of Cinderella plants that just get it all done.
And then they just fade away for the rest of the year.
Yeah. The way these anemones just cover the ground is phenomenal, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
And look at with the flowers open, just follow the sun from one side to the other.
They do. They have this really dense branching system of rhizomes just under the soil surface.
Look at those. There's loads of them, aren't there? And look how long they are.
You can just imagine them questing through the soil, can't you, really?
You can, can't you? And when you're propagating them, all you need to do is
snap them into sections.
And this would make a plant eventually.
Yes.
Yeah, fabulous, isn't it? What an excellent way of colonising the ground. And the light coming underneath them is just wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
What a lovely mossy bank, almost prehistoric.
Now, what do you think of that then, Carol?
I think Corydalis flexuosa has to be one of my favourite woodlanders.
It's a real classic woodlander, isn't it? It flowers like mad in the spring, and as soon as the moisture dries up in the soil, down it goes. And this one actually re-emerges with a bit of rain in the autumn.
Yeah, whereas the epimediums are there all the time, aren't they?
A clue to this behaviour is in its common name, barrenwort.
Yeah, because they'll grow anywhere.
They really will tolerate quite a lot of drought.
But your shortias in that bank, I have never ever seen shortia seeding like that.
Well, this is woodland planting on a grand scale. These are the oldest trees in the garden, and they date back to the 1750s.
They're lines, aren't they? They're really magnificent.
Fabulous specimens. And then underneath we've got all this semi-wild, semi-cultivated woodland. I'd rather they were English bluebells, but unfortunately they're the Spanish ones. They do cross with the English ones, and there's this great conservation movement currently to eradicate Spanish bluebells. But
yeah, so
they
should be.
Nonetheless, really.
Yeah, beautiful blue carpet, but it would be nicer if they were the real thing. The thing about woodlanders is that some people think you've got to have absolutely loads of shade and masses of, 4-acre beechwood, but you don't, do you? You just need any spot underneath deciduous trees or shrubs.
Right. The woodlanders are fairly undemanding, really. I think providing they die down for the summer, they tend to be all right.
What I love in a woodland garden of that size are these great drifts of flowers. And certainly here in my little shade garden, I'd like to get that effect, although I don't have that sort of space. Now, coming up in tonight's programme, Carol is revamping one of our more established areas of Berryfield. Joe is looking at our spring lawn problems, and Sarah is enjoying her favourite euphorbias.
I'm just digging up this fabulous geranium Oxonianum to give to Monty for his shade garden. It's growing here under the shade of this beautiful beech tree, but it's a geranium that'll grow absolutely anywhere. It's as tough as old boots. This is a corner of Berryfield that you very seldom see. I want to make it into a secluded garden with a difference. Instead of coming in here and doing the usual things, sitting on the seat, peace, tranquility, birds singing, I want you to come around the corner and be totally energised.
And no pinks, no blues, just vivid purples, bright oranges, wonderful lime greens. And there are so many plants in here that I can keep already. And here's one of them, this marvellous penstemon called blackberry ice. The best idea is to leave all their top growth on. Unlike all our herbaceous perennials that live under the ground for the winter, these keep all their top growth. They're evergreen perennials. And this growth actually protects all these little new shoots that are being formed in the base of a plant. Well, the weather's a bit dubious at the moment. I don't know whether to chop them all back now or whether just to do one or two. I think I'm going to do a bit of an experiment and then at least we'll have some of them left. So I'm going to go in here and actually take it right down to the base. I can already see these new shoots pushing their way through the soil. Just take them off quite cleanly, right at the base. I think these beautiful white hellebores over here are absolutely lovely. Later in the year, I'm going to dig them up, and with everybody's consent, I'm going to swap them for some of the black ones that we've got in the spring garden. But before I do, look at this. Seedlings. Last week I showed you how to pollinate hellebores, but of course they'll set their own seed and throw it around the garden, and it's a great bonus to actually lift some of them up and pot them and see what you get. They've only got their cotyledon leaves, just two little leaves at the top, but they've got a nice root system. Put them round the edge of a pot of decent sort of leafy compost and just keep them in a cold frame to grow on. Later on you can split them, separate them. With a bit of luck we'll have hundreds and hundreds of those. But when we've swapped them, those black ones are going to look a real treat.
With the weather warming up, the grass is really starting to put on some strong growth now, and it's the perfect time of year to get it stuck into some lawn maintenance. And we've got a few problem areas here at Berryfields. One of them being underneath this big beech tree. It's very shady and it's very dry too, and the soil's compacted. So I'm going to get stuck into this first. The problem under here is not just the shade and that it's dry. We've also got the tree roots that are coming up through it, and they're getting clipped by the mow. You can actually see this tree root's been damaged, and the soil is so compacted under here. So what we've got to do is try and loosen it all up, and then we're going to top dress it and seed it so that the roots can really get down deep, and hopefully that will be the answer. So the first job to do is to start scraping up the soil and getting the moss out. I'm going as deep as I can with this rake, but also being quite careful not to damage any more of the tree roots. Then aerate the lawn with a fork to break it up so the new grass can get its roots down. Cover the area with a topsoil with compost mixed in and a little bit of sharp sand. This will enable the new grass to have a good start, and the compost will help to retain some moisture. Levelling it off and marrying it in to the old turf, and you can see the grass coming through already, and the idea is that the old grass is going to come through, it's going to help it, but also I've broken up the soil so the new grass is going to have something to get its roots into at the same time. And now it's time to sow the seed. Now, if you go down the garden centre, there'll be a huge range of grass seed available, and it can be quite confusing. But the most important thing is trying to find the right seed for the right spot in your garden, and also to your level of maintenance. So I'm going for a grass seed mix, specifically for shady and dry areas, and it does contain dwarf rye, so it should be hard wearing too. Try and get an even spread, nice and even, and not too thick. Just going to finally rake it over, just nice and lightly, and then if it doesn't rain in the next day or two, I'm going to water it in as well. Here in the cottage garden, there's a much more formal lawn area, and in the autumn I did some regular maintenance on it, and it's looking a lot better. The thatch has gone, the clover seems to have gone out of it as well, but now we've just got a slight problem with the levels, especially along the edge here. the level of the lawn's actually dropped. So what I've got to do is actually physically lift this lawn level up. Simply cut away the affected area of turf with a half moon, lift it with a spade, then raise the area underneath by adding a loamy base soil with sharp sand mixed in about 50-50. Gently replace the turf and brush more topsoil into cut edges for a really neat finish. Well, that's two problem areas I've dealt with at Berryfields, and relatively easy ones to solve. But that's nothing compared to a couple that we visited in the northwest of Scotland who have to garden in the most extreme of conditions.
We're in the far northwest of Scotland. We're only 30 miles short of Cape Wrath. We're in the windiest part of Britain. We're also close to the sea, so we get salt spray, but we're surrounded by emptiness. Our nearest neighbour is a mile away. It's a very quiet and very remote place. Well, gardening at Kerricker is fun because there's no road at all to get into the house, and the only way most things can come in is by boat. So plants, potting, compost, everything comes in this little boat, even our big shed, which took 21 boat trips. Winter is very wet. We can often get 8, 10 inches, 12 inches of rain in a month. 20 degrees is quite warm for us, but it's very good from the gardening point of view because it means that we have a very long season. When we arrived, all there was deep beds of rushes, very, very waterlogged, boggy, and the steeper banks were covered in bracken. So there was nothing growing apart from the tiny garden immediately around the Croft House. Nothing else.
I just could tell, I think, from what was growing around the house, that this was potentially extremely good soil and very good growing conditions. So it seemed to me that the land outside the original garden would be reclaimable.
First things we had to do was a deer fence. Couldn't do anything without a deer fence. Second, get drainage in because the ground was waterlogged. Once that was done, it was a case of digging. Spent a whole of one summer just digging and incorporating lime and rock phosphate because the soil here is very acid and very lacking in nutrients. And then we just left it for a winter, and then the following spring we started planting.
We grow basically herbaceous perennials from all over the world. We've got plants growing from growing in the Arctic, from growing in northeastern Siberia, right down to the odd thing that comes from Brazil. The herbaceous things, of course, are better suited to here because being herbaceous, they very sensibly disappear for the winter. We've got less shrubs than we used to have, because we had this rather nasty gale in January, and we lost about 15 of our major mature shrubs, which was a bit tragic.
It's a wet day, and this is probably a clue to why this is a very good place to growing Meconopsis. A cool, wet climate is what they love, and in a year like this, we should get really good blooms. Here we can grow them anywhere, but in most gardens the best spot for them is a cool, shady corner. They don't need too much sun, but they do need good deep soil and plenty of food.
The main problem at Kerricker is the wind, particularly when it comes from the southeasterly direction down the loch, bringing salt with it, so you have to protect your plants from this. So we constructed some very substantial windbreaks, and these have worked extraordinarily well. My frontline troops, which have absolutely no protection whatsoever, they are very, very exposed. Rosa rugosa is the champion of them all. It takes absolutely anything you throw at it. We have got very colourful brooms, which are very gaudy. They get a bit burnt off on the outside, but the inside is what you see, so they look all right. The garden that we've made here is more than a full-time job. It occupies virtually all our waking hours. If we're not actually working in it, we're thinking it or arguing about it or discussing it or organising some sort of activity for it. So it is a complete occupation.
I do know that they often have to wash the salt spray off their plants. It's a hostile place in which to make a garden, but it's still very beautiful. Now, I'm fairly long way from making a beautiful garden here, but I'm encouraged by the path. And the next stage is to put up some trellis. Just because it's shady, it doesn't mean to say that you're desperately clutching at light. I want it to be enclosed. Remember, shade is not a problem. It's a good thing, and we want to use that. And if we can get climbers growing up the trellis, that will add the possibilities for colour and texture. I've chosen quite a chunky trellis, and it's got rounded edges, which I like. It certainly gives a better profile and a sort of softer feel to it. And I'm putting it up at 6 foot, screwing it onto battens because it's slightly short. Now, this is a bit tricky,
Monty,
but I can manage.
I'll give you a hand. Go on.
Okay. Let's get a spirit level onto it.
Okay.
Okay, so it's got to be on that level.
Okay.
I'm setting these away from the fence. It's a good idea to have a block between the fence and the trellis. That makes it much easier for plants to get behind them and twine through them, easier for you to tie them on, and also lets air up through them, and that avoids any risk of fungal disease between a fence and a trellis.
So what are you going to grow up then, Monty?
Well, there's actually a surprising range of plants that are perfectly good in really quite heavy shade. Almost all clematis will grow in shade. Honeysuckle, they'll take quite a lot of shade. You're not just limited to ivy and Hydrangea Petiliaris and all the other sort of well-known shade plants, although I will have those as well.
Yeah.
Right, let's get on with rolling.
But you're going to have enough trellis to grow it up anyway.
Yeah.
Now spring's finally arrived, hopefully we can start eating our rhubarb. So I'm just going to have a look under our forcing pots, which have got the little balls on top to keep the light off the plants. And look at that. But in fact, because it's been so cold, that stem's actually been frosted, so it won't be particularly good to eat. But now it'll start shooting, and hopefully we will get delicious, delicious meals from it and lovely crumble. Another plant that's rather like rhubarb in that it's perennial, and you can crop from it at this time of year, is sea kale. And so I'm going to put some of that in now that we'll plant now, but we won't be able to harvest, not even next spring, the spring after. But it's worth the wait because it's absolutely delicious. It's actually a wild plant that grows on shingle beaches near Ranmee in Kent. And you can see it on the wild, but you mustn't pick it because it's actually a protected wild flower. But it is really delicious. In fact, it's my mother's favourite vegetable, sea kale. She loves eating the tiny young leaves in salad in February and March, and then goes on and steams the slightly larger leaves through the rest of spring. And it's got a really delicious, very delicate, cabbagey sort of kale-y flavour. When you plant it, you want to put lots of grit into the planting holes so it really mimics its natural environment. We're actually planting one-year-old plants that were done from root cuttings, and you need to let the roots get really established well before the forcing process begins. So with putting the sea kale in, we've now created a really lovely perennial end to the productive garden here, to the vegetable garden, because we've got sea kale here now, we've got asparagus there, and we've got rhubarb there. So this will be a fantastic productive corner with perennial plants. As well as sea kale, I'm going to plant another couple of perennials in the vegetable garden today. They're euphorbias, and so I'm not growing them for eating, of course, but for picking, for arranging. And we're actually making a raised bed devoted to cut flowers this year to give us lots and lots of colour to pick for the house. Euphorbias are absolutely my favourite family of foliage plants for picking. And last year in my own garden at Perch Hill, I did an experiment with lots of different varieties to see which had the longest performance throughout the year. This is Euphorbia robbii, and it's absolutely fantastic for March and goes on right the way through until the end of spring. And it also is useful because it thrives in shade. There are are other varieties that will provide a range of colours, from vibrant acid green to smoky bronze foliage throughout spring and early summer. This is a marvellous, marvellous one for really April, May and even into June a bit, called Euphorbia palustris. But you can see that it's very floppy and loose growing. So beautiful, but it does need staking. And rather than using bamboo canes, I prefer to use these hazel nests. It grows up through it and hides the nest, but it's supported. So it's a beautiful way of doing it. Another great variety for April and May is Euphorbia mellifera, which has an incredible honey scent. This is Euphorbia sycamensis, and it's a beautiful one for June and July. It's got amazing red stems, and you can see it's really spectacular, jungly in height. I mean, it's taller than me, and so fantastic for the June and July garden, really more as a garden plant than for picking, although I do pick it for huge, tall vases for arranging with things like foxgloves. I do pick Euphorbia schillingii, which is this one, named after a plant hunter called Schilling. Slightly shorter, much bigger, juicier flowers, so even better really for picking. When cutting any euphorbias, be sure you wear gloves. The milky sap, when it touches your skin, can cause severe irritation. Before using them in flower arrangements, always strip the foliage from the stems at the base and sear the stem ends in boiling water. This seals in the sap and prevents the blooms from drooping. For a large vase arrangement, I'm using the tall stems of Euphorbia schillingii with a number of other flowers like the giant oak grass Stipa gigantea, long-stemmed Campanula media, electric blue delphiniums and exotic bright orange lily Fire King. Euphorbia oblongata is, I think, the best foliage plant in the whole world. It flowers for 6 months at a stretch if you keep picking it, and it forms the best structural foliage plant of all in a vase. I've just put in 3 lovely plants of oblongata here too, and it's just the most wonderful plant for hand-tied bunches as well as vases. I love it mixed with crimson sweet williams and orange marigolds. It looks fantastic, the acid green against those 2 rich colours. Last week I divided these Euphorbia palustris from the long border. I'm just popping in 3 nice clumps to pick later this spring.
I'm really pleased to see that cutting plants cheek the jowl with the vegetables.
Yep.
That's where they should be. But I know that I think you've mentioned this, but a lot of people are anxious about cutting euphorbias because they somehow feel that inevitably they're going to get burnt and blistered.
Yes, I do get a reaction to them, but I always cut them with gloves, and ever since I've done that, I've never, ever had a problem.
Right.
It really is fine. You mustn't sort of wipe away
I was going to say,
hair
I've done
from
that. I've gone like that.
Yeah.
And then wonder why I've got this great sort of rash across your face.
No, you do have to be aware of it, but I mean, I pick them almost every day of my life, and I no longer have a problem.
They are fantastic, absolutely wonderful plants.
Lucky you like them, because I've got you 3 lovely Euphorbia robii.
Fantastic.
For your shade garden, because they thrive in shade.
I love euphorbias, and to me they are the best colour in the spring.
They are, and they'll self-sow, as I'm sure you know. Brilliant. And they're lovely sort of rivers of acid green.
Oh, that's really good. Now, whether you've got euphorbias or not, here are some jobs you can get on with this weekend.
For something really different and exotic, why not plant some unusual summer flowering bulbs? They're in the garden centres now. I'm planting tiger flowers, or tigridias. in 2-litre pots to grow on and then plunge into gaps in the long borders in a few weeks' time. Really cram them in. They like to be overcrowded slightly, and you'll get explosions of the most amazing and exotic looking flowers.
Hardy annuals are usually sown direct into the soil in autumn or early spring. But if you haven't done it yet, seed sown now in pots or trays will rapidly overtake outdoor sowings. I'm sowing zingy orange pot marigolds and some unusual Nigella papilosa, African bride and midnight blue, for Sarah's cut flower bed and for my garden from seeds and cuttings. I use a cell tray and station sow one seed to each compartment and cover with a layer of grit. Water them well and put them in a cold frame.
If you grow strawberries, now's the time to give them a little bit of attention after winter. Cut back any lanky or dead growth, clear it all away, and then give them a good mulch with garden compost. And they'll repay this treatment with vigorous new growth.
Now's the time to protect young perennial shoots from slugs and snails. We're trying an organic garlic barrier method that not only creates a physical barrier around the base of the shoots, but also claims to promote healthy growth. We've chosen lupins and delphiniums in our cottage garden as our test plants, and we'll let you know how we get on in a few weeks' time.
Hello, everybody working and I'm not.
Same old story, Monty.
But are you just planting in? Are you taking in or taking out?
We're taking out these plantains because there are far too many of them in the mixture and they've seeded everywhere, and we're putting in some extra wildflowers.
Does that mean you've got to take all the plantains out?
Well, no, not quite all, because plantains are quite nice, but just not as many as we've got here.
That's the theory.
I'll come and help. That's obviously the thing to do. The bog is certainly, you're getting it back in, aren't you? You sort of pulled it back into shape.
Yeah, I think so, yeah, and it feels a lot wetter. The soil feels a lot better.
Yeah.
Just putting in Ligularia dentata in here.
I just wish they were growing a border. I wish there was a border wet enough, because to me they're decorative plants that should be in a border. Talking of moisture, next week I shall be looking at the whole situation of water here at Berryfields. We're looking at the dry garden, how to preserve moisture in the soil, and also perhaps recycling some of our grey water. Joe will be making a start on his brand new family garden, and also you'll be taking over the mantle of the container garden, won't you?
Apparently, yes. A bit nervous, never done it before.
It's
Vegetables.
good. Carol will be extending the range of nectar plants in our nectar bar. At the moment, they're concentrated on summer, and she'll be planting up some for spring and early summer. And Sarah will be making some sweet pea arches in the vegetable garden. So join us again at the same time for another 60-minute programme next week. Bye-bye. I'm afraid it's going to be a chilly weekend. On Saturday morning it'll start windy and cloud will clear in the south, giving some sunshine, but the rest of the country will have wintry showers, and those will be snowy on high ground. And on Sunday that north wind will bring snow back to Scotland, even at low-lying areas. We'll have some rain in the north, which will move south in the afternoon. So wherever you are, wrap up warm if you are going to be outside gardening. Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I've got a honeysuckle here in the cottage garden that has done nothing in the 3 years we've been here at Berryfield. I've never seen a single flower on it. I don't even know what the flower's like, so I can't identify it exactly, but it's semi-evergreen and probably from the Japonica group. However, I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm going to cut it back hard, dig it up and move it, because I've got a new home for it where I think it may well do better. Part of the problem seems to me that it's very dry under the shadow of this hedge, and there's an old tree stump, which I presume it was planted to clamber over. Now, tonight's one-hour programme does have a kind of theme over and above our normal seasonal jobs, and that is gardening in extreme conditions. I shall be making a start on my shade garden. Carol will be working in the alpine garden. Joe will be doing some spring maintenance around the pond and getting to grips with the bog garden. And Sarah will be sowing tender vegetables. At the end of last week's programme, we showed you these 3 brand new plots that myself, Carol and Joe will be making this series. They're completely empty, they're in a row, and we can do whatever we like in them. Now, I've started to dig out a curving path that I want to arrive at the tree, but the one dominant factor about this space is shade. Now, I get loads of letters with people saying, how do I deal with the problem of shade? And I always say the same thing, it's not a problem. It's an opportunity. There's lots that you can do with it. Loads of plants that actually relish it and like the shelter. But before you begin thinking about planting, you need to work out a kind of horticultural clock of where the sun operates throughout the day in your garden. And on this spot, if I stand here, I'm looking up to the sun, which is shining weakly through the cloud and coming through a whole tangle of branches. Now, there are no leaves yet, but it won't be long before that is just a solid wall of foliage, and I'll get no sun here at all in the morning. And this tree, this beautiful pear tree, which is the centre of the garden and where the path is leading round to, is lovely. But it does have a canopy, and again, no sun will get through that. So I do need to bear that in mind. However, here at Berryfields, the sun rises in the east, which is over there, comes up, and you can see the sun shining on me now, and will clear